Leonardo Minicio was born on March 25, 1925 in Sabang, Dasmariñas, Cavite. Leonardo's baptism as an infant have Jose Barzaga as godfather, who belonged to a wealthy clan whose scions were prominent lawyers, landowners, and politicians in the town. His father Juan Minicio was a farmer and politician of some consequence in his town, and enjoyed a long-time affiliation centered on the prominent Karungkong, Mangubat, and Barzaga families. Leonardo Minicio, better known as Nardong Putik. Leonardo Minicio, better known as Nardong Putik. In October 1944, at which time the archipelago was still under Japanese occupation, a band of robbers intruded in the peaceful backyard of the Minicios. These men were cattle rustlers who were after the carabaos of farmers. Juan lay lifeless after the brigands had left. It was a senseless murder, an act most foul that would embitter and leave an indelible mark in the mind of the 21-year-old Leonardo. He tried to forget that painful, sad chapter, wanting to move on to live his own life, but he apparently never did. For it would later turn out that his father's killers were not just mere cattle rustlers. They were, in actuality, members of a guerrilla group who had fierce opposition against Juan's political benefactors. What was worse was that the murderers would begin turning their attention to the slain farmer's son, who, by now, had started to acquaint himself with the ways of the world. But the wicked scheme never found realization, probably due to the crafty and wily movements of Leonardo. It was around this time when Leonardo must have started to assume the sobriquet originally used by his deceased father. Back when he was still alive, the old man was known as Juan Putik, the latter word referring to mud. There were actually other tales that abounded on how the deceased farmer's son came to be known as Nardong Putik. One is that the area where the family lived was muddy. Another is that supposedly Leonardo's skin was dark, similar to the color of mud. The latter tale, however, contradicted the later images of Leonardo that would grace the newspaper pages. This Dasmariñas lad appeared to have a fair skin and sported a strikingly handsome appearance, enough to draw female notice, if not admiration. Adding to his persona was Leonardo's physique, which, again, would easily generate awe from the fairer sex. Later photos of the man would also show the existence of tattoos on his bare torso, the most prominent of which was the one reading Kilobot, Terror, across his lower abdomen. After the war, Nardong Putik, or Muddy Leonard as the foreign press would later refer to him, just like his old man, ingratiated himself with his father's political patrons, the powerful clique of Karungkong, Mangubat, and Barzaga clans. But Nardong Putik must have failed to come to grips with the realization that not all the time he could rely on his vaunted amulet. Those who were knowledgeable of this voodoo charm claimed that there were restrictions or conditions that the possessor must observe at all times to be invulnerable. Some of which included that wearer must not drink liquor or must not indulge in sex while in possession of the anting, or must strictly recite the prayer that came with it. It is not known whether Nardong Putik did violate any of these norms, nor is it known whether he indeed gained the power of invulnerability if ever he strictly observed what was prescribed by the anting. By this time, the protection which Nardong Putik had enjoyed from his political benefactors was no longer there. The gruesomeness of his last deed must have prompted his erstwhile allies, the Karungkongs and the Camarinos, to distance themselves from the merciless Cavite outlaw. Likewise, since the latest trophies that he had added to his list were agents of the National Bureau of Investigation, a national office, it was but expected for the occupant in Malacanang Palace, President Ferdinand Marcos, to likewise refuse to accord any further privilege to Nardong Putik. In the morning of that momentous October day, a joint PCNBI force was manning a spot between the highways of Panamitan and Talon in the Cavite town of Kawit. It was reported that a red Chevrolet Impala car driven by Nardong Putik failed to obey the signal of the operatives to stop. This was enough to prompt them to fire at the speeding car. Minutes of non-stop gunfire then ceased. When the lawmen approached the bullet-riddled car, the bloodied occupant's face was badly mutilated, beyond recognition. It was the end of Nardong Putik. Leonardo Minicio was married to Feliciana Nolasco but had many wives. He had one known son, Leonardo, Jr., and two known daughters, Angelita and Estrelita, with his legal wife.